the anti-vaxxers. They are putting at risk their own kids, and they're putting at risk our kids as well. And those people are putting us all at risk. Aaron O'Toole is siding with them instead of with Canadians who did their part and stepped up. Canadians have shown it in being there for each other. And I am not going to back down no matter how many of them show up to try and shout us down. So shame on you, Aaron O'Toole. You need to condemn those people. And that means we're going to work on vaccination certifications, on vaccination passports.
And that we work with the provinces on vaccine certifications.
If you want to get on a plane or a train in the coming months, you're going to have to be fully vaccinated. Now is the time for people who are still resistant to getting vaccinated, that there will be consequences for those people in not being able to go to a gym or a restaurant, not being able to go to a movie theater, not being able to get on a train or a plane.
Our plan is to make sure that anyone on a plane or train is vaccinated, that anyone in the federal public service gets vaccinated.
And we know that the way to get through this as well is to make sure that people can go into non-essential businesses and feel safe that they're not going to get catch COVID from someone next to them.
We all have an opportunity to get back a little more to normal. Except that those people who have not yet chosen to get vaccinated are putting all this at risk.
The risk posed to all of us by unvaccinated people?
Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame!
Le refus d'obtempérer à cet ordre vous rend passible d'une amende pouvant aller de 1 000 à 6 000 $.
Not only are they putting at risk our kids who are still too young to get vaccinated. I have a 7-year-old who started in grade 2 just earlier this week. Very excited about it, but he's vulnerable. All of us, even if we did the right things and got vaccinated, are at risk of lockdowns because of future waves of unvaccinated.
Having us risk more lockdowns because they haven't chosen to get vaccinated yet.
Please, everyone, if we can be respectful and we can leave.
Piece of shit! Transphobic piece of shit! Transphobic piece of shit! Transphobic, where we draw the line. This is where.
In September, the federal government posted a call for expressions of interest for contractors to supply, provide, and manage quarantine isolation camps throughout every province and every territory in Canada. These quarantine isolation camps, however, are not limited to people with COVID, but provide a wide latitude for many people to be detained. Surely this government is aware of the intentions to build these isolation camps from coast to coast. And my question to the Premier is, how many of these camps will be built? And how many people does this government expect to detain?
My son is supposed to be coming in from the flight from Phoenix, and he is being detained because they didn't accept his test. They're saying it's not accurate, and they are wanting to take him to a quarantine facility. They won't let me talk to him. They won't let me see him. They won't come and talk to me. The board, they say he doesn't have a choice. They say that it's the law. They say that I don't have the right to talk to him, to see him. and they are taking him against my will and his will, and I'm not okay with it, and I don't know what to do about it, and I don't know where I'm supposed to find him. So this quarantine facility apparently is up and running and totally legal, as they say, and I'm freaking out.
Today, we're confirming an additional $23.7 million in federal funding to operate isolation sites in regions such as Toronto, Peel, York, and Durham. And we're finalizing the details for similar sites in Thunder Bay, Windsor, and other regions.
Quebec is planning to force adults that refuse a COVID vaccine to pay what's called a health contribution tax.
Those who refuse to receive their first dose in the coming weeks will have to pay a new health contribution.
We will be putting forward measures to put those tools permanently in place. The authorities of FinTrack, I believe, do need to be expanded to cover crowdsourcing platforms and payment platform and their payment providers.
Mais il y a aussi des gens qui sont farouchement opposés à la vaccination. Qui sont extrémistes. Qui croient pas dans la science, qui sont souvent misogynes, souvent racistes aussi. Et là, il faut faire un choix en tant que leader, en tant que pays. Est-ce qu'on tolère ces gens-là?
So we need to rethink our notion of what terrorism is these days. Is that the point?
Well, I think be more expansive in our definition. I really see two main streams, and one is an emphasis on nationalism, also tied in with a anti-statist or anti-authoritarian perceptions.
And why would we call it right-wing extremism?
You know, that traditional left-right ideological spectrum, liberalism, conservatism.
A new report that really is a warning about rising online activity by right-wing extremists in Canada.
In Canada, we found that right-wing extremists were more active in 2020 than they were in 2019. The accounts belonging to right-wing extremists were more prevalent and more accessible.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his government's COVID restrictions were a frequent target of those attacks.
Well, I absolutely do think that white supremacist movements are a very real, a very grave threat to Western liberal democracy. I think they are a grave and real threat here in Canada.
The next terrorist killer in Canada is known. We can build the profile. It's a guy. He's white. And he's probably said some shit. He's probably made you feel a little bit uncomfortable with some of his comments. He might have a thing for military paraphernalia or firearms. And we need to snitch on these guys.
You want my life, Jesse Brown? You come and take it. Don't send the millennials after me on your little witch hunt.
The small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are...
That's why I went to Ottawa. 9 out of 10 stages for genocide present in Canada right now. And apparently, the target of this little witch hunt, the profile of the next terrorist killer in Canada, is just about everybody I know who's ever bled for this country. Are you going to tell me that we weren't met with hatred?
That's a wounded veteran! That's a wounded warrior right there! That's the fucking head! That's the Hey, you don't have to hit him like that. Move back. Please.
Are you going to tell me that those cops didn't hate us?
Man being kneed there. It's terrible.
Oh, come on through. Come on through. What is happening here? Wow. What is this lady doing? Trampling. Trampling horses. Trampling. Stop it. Stop it. Look. Oh my God.
And that profile of the next terrorist killer? You're going to tell me that's by accident? I'm not so sure. Hey, what's up, troops? It's Jeff Evely here, Ops Sgt-Maj for Veterans for Freedom. I'm back with you now on the 10th day of 2023, January, that is. We got a lot going on out there. Sorry I missed you guys yesterday, first of all. I started to do a little bit of an upgrade, I guess. Not much of an upgrade, but as you can see, I'm in a different spot here with my home studio, and I made a few changes. And anyway, I figured if I was going to make the change, I might as well go big or stay home, which is kind of what I always do. And often I end up biting off a little more than I can chew. So I was doing a little rewire here of the house, and I realized that I got the wrong electrical box for the project that I was doing. And it was Sunday, so the hardware store was closed early, and before you knew it, I was just kind of in a bind here with my internet connectivity and whatnot. So anyway, I had to put a pause on yesterday's operations there just to make sure I got myself squared away, all tickety-boo, but we're better than ever and carrying on as if we were normal. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into this thing here. Oh, I think I lost my share screen. Let me pull it back up. And here we go. Okay, here's our philosophy meme of the day. This is my boy, Marcus Aurelius. He was the last good emperor of Rome. I recommend that everybody read his meditations every day. Just read a passage and you will feel better. And the meditations of Marcus Aurelius are actually his personal diary. He quotes a lot of philosophy. His story is basically that he was the adopted son of the emperor. And I think what they were doing at the time in Rome was they would adopt people to succeed the throne instead of making it family lineage. It was kind of like the Romans were very democratic, or at least they were trying to be for the longest time. He was a philosopher for most of his life, but then he ended up being chosen to succeed the throne, and he didn't really want it. So, but he turned out to be the last good emperor of Rome, and probably one of the best men in history. So I recommend you read his diary, his personal diary, his meditations. It's kind of his coaching that he gives himself in the morning and in the evening. And what you will realize when you read that is that your struggles are his struggles, his anxieties are your anxieties, and everything that we're having to deal with now is basically just a part of the human condition. So nothing, I think, provides greater insight into that truth than the personal diary of Marcus Aurelius called The Meditations. So anyway, here's Marcus, and he says, "There is one thing of real value, to cultivate truth and justice, and to live without anger in the midst of lying and unjust men." So that's Marcus Aurelius, and I think that's very good advice for the times. I've been noticing, there's a lot going on out there in the freedom movement right now. Not all of it good. Seems like there's a little bit of drama here and there, Personally, I'm just trying to stay out of it. And, but I do know a lot of people that seem to be getting kind of caught up in it, and it's really dragging them down, And what I keep telling everybody is, look, don't take it personally, okay? This is a war, and that's how I'm treating it professionally. Obviously, it's an ideological war, but
you can't take this stuff personally. I mean, we're going to lose some troops along the way, and we can't save all the children. That's kind of some of the harsh truths that you need to accept going into this if you're going to be able to keep your wits about you. So, yeah, if you want to stay strong and you want to stay in it for the long haul, then you can't let these setbacks, you can't take them personally. You can't engage with those negative emotions every time something like that happens. The emotions are just something that need to be managed, and you should treat it like that. So that's my advice, everybody, and Marcus's as well. So come on, computer. No, my computer is just not cooperating. And I'm going to pull that out for a second, find out what's going on with this. Bam. Okay. We're back in here. Try this again. No, she's being really finicky. Okay. So, moving on from Marcus. Okay, I saw this one going around, so I shared it on Facebook as well. And here's a picture of Karl Marx. He's every bit the hairbag you might expect just looking at him. I read somewhere that it was Friedrich Engels who was his enabler, his sponsor, basically. He just freeloaded off this rich guy, Engels. Marx himself was the son of, his father was very successful. I can't really remember what his father did. He might have been a businessman, if I'm not mistaken, or a lawyer maybe. I don't know. But anyway, his father was very successful. Karl Marx has a lot of daddy issues. He's a profit gener, so raised as indulged. And that would have been what, the wake of the last the previous crisis. So that would have been around, yeah, I'm not sure, but well, yeah, Civil War, and but he's not American, obviously. But anyway, he once wrote to Friedrich Engels, who was the guy who supported him and basically adopted him and let him live in his house and freeload off him and couch surf his entire life, as he crafted the dogma that we're all having to deal with now. But anyway, it says on March 14th, 1883, Karl Marx made his most important contribution to mankind. He died. And yeah, he wrote to Friedrich Engels after the death of Engels' wife, and in the same letter that he was consoling his best friend and roommate for years and years and years, he asked him for money. So this guy is a total sponge who just hates people who generate wealth. He hates productive people, and he can't stand the fact that, his dad gets up at a certain time every day, and he has a schedule, and he makes sure that his life is in order, and that leads to success. This guy just kind of surfed on the couch and wrote a bunch of resentful dogma about how people who live their lives that way are evil and need to be overthrown. So we're still living with that legacy. And okay, so here is Joe Rogan, and he did a pretty great podcast there with this guy, Peter Zaihan. And yeah, I'm going to let Peter talk a little bit here. I have a few different takes on some of the things that he said, but this is a really good clip. It's about 14:22 there. I think I'm just going to let him go because it's very data rich. There's a lot of content, not a lot of wasted verbiage or anything like that. He seems like a very knowledgeable guy. I can tell he does kind of have a bit of a left leaning to him. He says during the interview that he's a green, and I notice things like when he's giving these kinds of scenarios, when it's a bad scenario, he says, imagine if Trump did this. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, Trump's not president. It's imagine if Biden did this, right? So there were a couple of moments like that when I realized that, okay, this guy's a little bit on the left, but you know what? He says he's agnostic in his analysis, and I think he's genuine, right? I think he's saying what he really believes. I don't think he's trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes here. I don't think he's an ideologue or anything like that. He seems like a very reasonable guy. He's just a little bit left-leaning, and he's a Gen Xer, so check him out.
Population column from 1945 to 1992.
Population columns.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
The rich world was a population column from 1945 to 1992. And with the end of the Cold War, the developing world became a column in 1992 until now. The problem is that this is all temporary because birth rate keeps dropping, people keep living older, and your column eventually inverts into an open pyramid, upside down. And now you no longer have children. You no longer have a replacement generation at all. And there aren't enough people in their 20s and 30s to buy everything.
Yeah, so the inverted pyramid, the upside down pyramid, is when the generations, the youngest generations are the smallest generations, and the oldest generations are the largest generations. And that's kind of where we are right now, right? And of course, the problem that we're having is like, well, how do we support that? How do we support these public pensions, these entitlements programs for the retirees, the boomers in particular, because they're an enormous generation. And they didn't have enough kids. Well, I'm going to let him explain it, I guess, but they didn't have enough kids, and then small generations precipitate smaller generations. It's kind of a consequence of our prosperity and birth control. I really think that this has been going on for quite a while. It's all kind of reminiscent of the Tower of Babel stories and whatnot. So anyway, here's Peter Zaihan. I'll try not to interrupt him too much.
And there aren't enough people in their 40s and 50s to pay for the retirees. So this decade was always going to be the decade that most of the advanced world moves into mass retirement and the economic model collapses. And next decade was always going to be the decade that happened to the developing world. And we find out recently that the Chinese have jumped the ship, and this is their last decade too. So all of the globalized connections and consumptions that create the world we know, we are at the end of it. And we have to go back to a world where trade is more focused on the countries that have a better demographic and security infrastructure, because the Americans are no longer patrolling the global oceans anymore. So we're losing the security ramifications of an open system. At the same time, we're losing the demographic capacity to support it in the first place. And that's all going down right now.
So when you're saying that China has 10 years to go,
at most,
what do you mean by that?
Well, we now know that they've lied about their population statistics, and they overcounted their population by over 100 million people, all of whom would have been born since the one-child policy was adopted. So this is one of those places where they've got more people in their 60s and their 50s and their 40s and their 30s and their 20s.
Now, what was the logic behind the one child? Was it that they were overpopulating?
Mao was concerned that as the country was modernizing, the birth rate wasn't dropping fast enough, and that the young generation was literally going to eat the country alive. So they went through a breakneck urbanization program, which destroyed the birth rate. At the same time, they penalized anyone who wanted to have kids. And both of those at the same time have generated the demographic collapse we're in now.
And the problem with that also was that they wanted male children.
Yeah, there's a cultural aspect to that too. And obviously men can't have kids on their own.
And what is the ratio to men to women in the younger people in China now?
Before the data revision, with the last set of lies, it was about 1 to 1.2. It was the most distorted in the world, even more than Sri Lanka, where there had been a civil war for 30 years. Since then, we don't have good sex-by-sex data, but it's undoubtedly worse.
And so what are the other problems that they're encountering that leads you to believe that they only have 10 years left?
Well, without young people, we've seen their labor costs increase by a factor of 14 since the year 2000. So Mexican labor is now 1/3 the cost of Chinese labor. Their educational system focuses on memorization over skills. So despite $1 trillion of investment in a bottomless supply of intellectual property theft, they really haven't advanced technologically in the last 15 years. Mexican labor is probably about twice as skilled as Chinese labor now, even though it's 1/3 the cost. They've consolidated into...
I thought that was an awesome point right there. The Mexicans are better technologically. Their manufacturing is much better than the Chinese, and their labor is 1/3 the cost. And here we are in North America having all our manufacturing performed by the Chinese? How did that happen? And I've often wondered, if we were really going to go for cheap labor in Asia, why not the Indians, for example? I mean, they're English speaking, capitalist, pro-Western. So why not India? And well, of course, the answer is CCP influence. So yeah, this is something I think to focus on in terms of a strategy and the way ahead. If I haven't said it on this program before, I'm a big proponent of Fortress North America at this point, and just demographically speaking, because I've mentioned it here before, what's going on in Europe right now, especially in the wake of the migrant crisis. France is moving very quickly toward civil war. Britain, all kinds of problems, videos and whatnot coming out of there. And I've even seen a couple coming out of Toronto now, just some very radical views that are being imported from the Middle East and Africa, anyway, so I'll let Peter continue here, but there could be, what I'm saying about Europe is, as Douglas Murray has pointed out, it could be the demographic death of Europe because of the high birth rates that they're importing from the Middle East and Africa relative to the low birth rates in Europe. And so they're basically looking at, in a few generations, we could be looking at a very different Europe. And perhaps we may be in a position where accepting, white Christian refugees from places like France might become a necessity. So we want to make sure we got a good, strong Fortress North America on this side of the globe. And it was always the case that, for the Americans at least, that they wanted to keep communism out of the Western Hemisphere. Now, Cuba's been there forever, and they've been using that as a proxy to gain a foothold into South America. We're starting to see some of the rotten fruits of that now with Venezuela and Brazil that I'm going to talk about a little later in the show. But yeah, I mean, Fortress North America all the way. Let's get some manufacturing going in Mexico. The United States has more rivers and streams than all the other countries in the world, so they are the ideal place to be doing commerce, geographically speaking. Farming, we got farming covered with Canada in particular. I mean, all the potash and the potatoes of Oregon, the potash of is it Oregon? Is Idaho, and the potash in Saskatchewan. That's all there because the last time Yellowstone went off. So we have until then. We have until the next time that sucker goes off to really build ourselves a good fortress over here, and hopefully Elon Musk will have a nice fallback position on Mars sometime in the not too distant future. But don't hold your breath.
An ethnic-based, paranoid, nationalistic cult of personality. And it's very difficult for the Xi administration to even run it because it's not an administration anymore. No one wants to bring Xi information on anything. So, like, Putin lied to his face, for example, but last February about the wars. Why would I?
That's what happens in authoritarian regimes. Nobody's ever willing to speak up, to upset the apple cart. Everything has to be going perfectly all the time. The objective here is to please your master. So watch The Death of Stalin. And I mean, it's comical. It's a dark comedy. It's comical to watch, but it really is kind of like that. And I'm just speaking from my experience, in the military and in headquarters and whatnot. An authoritarian culture where all that really matters is what the guy in charge says and thinks. This is what it leads to. It leads to isolated leaders, isolated paranoid leaders, like Xi, like Putin, and like Trudeau. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit.
Invade Ukraine, and you can see in some of the presses the defense guys in the back of the room like, they didn't want to say anything because Xi has a history of shooting people he doesn't like. And so the Chinese were the only country that was caught with their pants down when this all went down. The Biden administration is basically taking the trade policy of Donald Trump and running it through a grammar checker and putting it into institutions. So we now have tech barricades that prevent the Chinese from buying the equipment, the tools, or the software that's necessary to make semiconductors. In fact, he went so far as to say any Americans working in the sector have to either quit or give up their American citizenship. Every single one of them either quit or was transferred abroad within 24 hours. So the tech system is stalled. They don't have the young people to go consumption-led. They're completely dependent on the U.S. Navy to access international trade. They are the most vulnerable country in the world right now. And based on how things go with Russia, we're looking at a significant amount of raw materials falling off the map, specifically food and energy. And the Chinese are the world's largest importer of both of those things. So there's no version of this where China comes through looking good. And the challenge for the rest of us is to figure out how do we, in as smooth and quick as a process as possible, figure out how we can get along without them, because they are going away. And they're going away this decade for certain.
Well, if you say they're going away, clearly they're not just going to lay down. They're
they'll
going to
die.
try to adjust.
Yeah, they'll die.
Right? But how so? Do you think this is because, like, what is...
He's quite blasé. You can tell he spends a lot of time thinking about very dark subjects, and this is kind of what I'm talking about when I'm saying everybody's got to stay frosty and not take things personally. It's not a question when we're trying to address the truth. It's not a question of what you want to be true. It's just a question of what is. And I find that that's the way this guy speaks, and it fits very well with the Strauss-Howe generational theory's description of the nomad generational archetype, which is Gen X. And we are the reactive generational archetype. We tend to just say, it is what it is, accept it, and adapt. So adapt and overcome, really. Anyway, let's pay attention for that.
Other than, well, here would be a big problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Taiwan. Like if we impose the kind of sanctions that we've imposed on Russia, if China decides to invade Taiwan and the world stands up and the world imposes sanctions on China, how does that go?
Very ugly for the Chinese. So, say what you will about the Russian economy. It's corrupt, it's inefficient, it's not very high value add, but it's a massive producer and exporter of food and energy. You put the sanctions that are on the Russians on Beijing, and you get a deindustrialization collapse and a famine that kills 500 million people in under a year. And the Chinese know this. They can only push so hard. Also, you can make the argument that if the Russians succeed, they actually solve or at least address some of their problems. Even if the Chinese were able to capture Taiwan without firing a shot, it doesn't solve anything for them. They're still food importers. They're still dependent upon the United States. They're still energy importers. And even if they take every single one of those semiconductor fab facilities intact, they don't know how to operate them because they can't operate their own. And their own are among the worst in the world, not the best.
Whew.
Now, the only reason, in my opinion, to be concerned about a Taiwan war.
So I'm just going to throw on that because I talk about this as well. The fact that, there's that Orwellian stifling of the human mind that takes place under authoritarian regimes. And, it really is the case that they kind of manufacture this. It's called compartmentalization. It's a psychological compartmentalization where, whatever reason or whatever logic they apply elsewhere in their lives, they just won't allow it into this one little part here. It's a sign, I believe, of psychological trauma that's inflicted on people through the process of indoctrination into an ideology or a faith or whatever. Once you kind of limit them thusly, you end up in a situation where, the Anglosphere is absolutely dominant in, patents, the number of patents out there, and the West more broadly. Everywhere where we see free societies, we see like the freer people are, the more patents they tend to file. And in China, they outnumber us vastly. But the number of patents is incredibly small compared to ours, especially in light of the fact that they outnumber us. And some of their patents are a little bit silly. Like, they have an ice cream drawer in the fridge that's part freezer, part fridge, so the ice cream doesn't get too hard, that sort of thing. So there tends to be a lack of creativity that's even available to people once they've been so psychologically abused and traumatized by authoritarian regimes like the CCP.
Is because Xi has so isolated himself that when one person is making all the decisions and that one person refuses to access information to make the decisions, strange stuff happens.
And when you say refuses to access, what do you mean by that?
He does not have.
So I want you to think about Trudeau while he's talking about Xi Jinping here, or is he talking about Vladimir Putin? But it basically applies to all three of these guys. Think about Trudeau when he's talking here.
Of normal information flows anymore. Like even at the height of the Trump administration, when Trump was basically isolated himself from the entire intelligence community, he was still getting the daily briefing. There was still information being put in front of him. But Xi is so isolated himself. He doesn't want to hear anything except for what he wants to hear.
That's kind of an example of his, left-leaning. I think he's kind of anti-Trump like that, but I think he's a very good source of information nevertheless.
And since no one knows what the status of the conversation with the voices in his head in on any given day, no one wants to bring him anything unless they're ordered to.
How do we know this about him?
Because there's no one to listen to anymore. That's one of the fun things about Russia versus China right now, is that the Russian information security is so poor that American intelligence is literally listening in on everything. But in China, we can hear into the office, but there are no conversations happening.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean? Like, so no one talks to him about anything?
Anything. If you look at,
so he's just terrifying to people.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he murders dissidents. He murders anybody that.
He doesn't murder everyone, but there's a lot of people in prison.
And there's also a lot of billionaires that got disappeared,
right?
And any dissent.
Yeah, you're either executed or exiled, intimidated into silence. There's a variety of options. And if you look at the third party Congress that we had late last year, that's when they select the Politburo. Everyone on the Politburo now is a personal flunky. There is no one from a different faction. There is no one that has a history of being competent.
Whew. And what is their plan?
The Chinese?
Yeah. Do we have any idea of what their plan to get out of this is?
Nationalism. If you know that the economic situation is going to go to pot, then you have a couple of options. Option one is you try to cut a deal with a country that can help you out, but the only country that could do that is the United States. And the sort of strategic surrender that the Americans would require is not something that the Chinese would accept. So think about Germany in 1946. That's the scale of support and control that the Americans would insist upon for giving the Chinese a lease on life. But if you go with nationalism, give people a non-economic reason to support the state. So even if you lose your job, even if you can't feed your family, I'm Chinese, I'm Han, that's enough. That has been the strategy for the last couple of years. Will it be enough to preserve the CCP? Too soon to know.
Okay. And one of the titles here for today is Demographics is Destiny. And I have pointed out before that that politics is by and large about ethnicity. And that's not me talking. That's Yale professor Amy Chua. Check out her book called Political Tribes. And what we have over in the old world is the same indigenous tribes squabbling over the borders of their ancestral homeland since time immemorial. The only section of the old world that really changed was Rome after the collapse, and the eventual, migration across the Atlantic here to North America, where, it was a sordid history, but ultimately partnerships were built with the people who lived here. I would definitely be a proponent of abolishing the Indian Act at this point. I think we have apartheid in Canada, and it's a darn sin this day and age. But anyway, we are basically the first continent, the first culture to overcome ethnicity and tribalism. And right now, what they're doing is they're pushing at the seams of that cultural mosaic with all the hateful propaganda and whatnot. They're trying to get the ethnicities pitted off one another and all the different groups subdivided into smaller and smaller groups and atomized all the way down to an individual or two. So it's a very polarizing dogma that they're inflicting, and it has everything to do with human nature. Okay, that's what we're dealing with here. And the Russians and the Chinese are basically looking at the end of their ethnicity within the next century. So and probably sooner. And he talks about that a lot. And we're not thinking about that in North America. We're not focused on that at all. It's like we're totally blind to that element of it. But yeah, that's kind of what a lot of the politics is coming down to geopolitically, is certain ethnicities are dying out, and others in the third world in particular, like Africa, is going to be the dominant population sometime in the next 100 years. Really, Africa's rising now. So it seems that when populations rise and reach a certain level of prosperity, the birth rate dies out. You get this inverted population pyramid, and it collapses like a Tower of Babel. And this is the human story, just over and over again. So,
and they're in the middle of the worst aspect of the pandemic for them ever.
Yeah. Now,
which is very strange for us because we're on the other end of it, right? So what happened over there?
Well, let me start by saying I think it's safe to say that no country has really figured out how to handle this well.
Right.
Second, I will say there are 7 different variants circulating in Beijing right now, or in China right now. 3 of them did not exist 2 or 3 months ago. And it takes about 6 months of data for you to get good information on the R0 and the lethality. So we just don't know. And then third, in part because of Xi, when you're a one-man state, all policy and all authority starts and stops with you. And unless you're providing very clear guidance on everything, which is impossible for one person to do for a whole country, especially one the size of China, the bureaucracy either goes into automatic or does nothing. Well, right now it's doing nothing. So the data decisions in China are not to gather data and figure out what we can do. It's to, instead of gathering data and lying about it, we're just not going to gather any data at all. So we're not going to know how bad these strains are until they get out of China and circulate in the rest of the world for 6 months. So the lowest fatality estimate that I have seen that I consider credible is that they're going to lose 1.5 million people.
Just from COVID.
Just from COVID. That assumes no broader breakdown in the health system, which we are already seeing.
And is this because they don't have natural immunity because of the rigid lockdowns that they encountered?
Yeah, from a plus point of view, they did keep the virus out of the population for almost 3 years. So no one has natural immunity. But we also know that their domestically generated vaccines aren't great. And most of the countries that used them in order to get their kind of first batch then moved on to a Western model that worked better.
So they had a twofold problem. They did not have vaccines and they didn't develop natural immunity.
And now everyone's getting hit all at once with a virus that has at least 50% more communicability than the measles.
And their overall health
is worse than ours. Diabetes as a percentage of the population is higher. They don't have a critical care system like we have. And their hospitals are really their only line of defense. They don't have a clinic and a doctor system in the towns like we do.
And what about nutrition education and the understanding of...
Yeah, it's when you industrialize very, very quickly, especially in a culture like China where food is considered a sign of wealth, getting fat is the thing to do. So we've got a lot of diabetes, a lot of hypertension, a lot of overweight people, and over 2/3 of the population lives in a metro region and their air quality sucks too. So we're kind of seeing like the worst aspects of the Indian system and the American system all in one.
Sorry, I didn't turn my mic back on. Holy smokes. So not bad, guys. So I think I'm just going to leave this one here. It's, you know, I think the picture that we're painting here for China is pretty bleak. And like I was saying, demographics is destiny. And they're very vulnerable right now, especially economically. And the only thing that I would kind of caution against here to go against the grain of what's being said is they've been on a war footing for a very long time. Like if you just kind of look back, they've always been building toward this. And also the fact that so many men don't have wives and the obvious strain on resources there, that all moves them in the direction of a war. Those are pressures to which they could respond with a war. And that's the historical go-to, I guess, for the human species. And all of the markers are there, and they seem to be getting increasingly aggressive, especially since Biden took over. So the idea that China is probably going to be no more in about 10 years. I'm definitely on board with that idea. I see the same thing in terms of the demographics. I think is the points that he puts forward here are very well supported. But that doesn't mean that we're going to get to the end of that 10 years without a major war, as in a global conflict that is total in nature. So, yeah, so moving on here. So this happened. CTV Edmonton was in the middle of a broadcast when their reporter had a medical emergency on air, and we all know what it looks like to us. They're not going to say what it is. But here's the message from the reporter, a message from Jessica Robb. On Saturday night, a very personal and vulnerable moment unfolded as I reported live on air. Since then, it has been shared thousands of times along with baseless theories about the cause. To everyone who has reached out with supportive message of well wishes and concern, thank you. It's been overwhelming, and while I can't get into all of the messages, please know I've seen them and appreciate every single one. I have also received an overwhelming amount of harassment and hatred tied to false theories about the reason for the incident. While I will not share private medical information publicly, I can say that there is no cause for concern and that my understanding of my own medical background provides a reasonable explanation for what happened. I can, however, confirm that the situation was in no way related to the COVID-19 vaccine. Okay, so that's what she's saying. So here is the broadcast itself. Now, I don't know. She's saying she's not going to share private medical information, so we don't know whether she's vaxxed or not, but here it is on air. From TMZ.
Has come just a week before the 3rd anniversary.
Well, people we spoke with say they were happy that something is being done, but this is something that they've been asking for since day one. So for them, this is about 1,000 days too late. Now, Nariman, looking at after the day, families are pushing the feds to. Sorry, Airman, I'm not feeling very well right now, and I'm about to.
Okay, we'll come back to me right now, and we'll make sure that, Jessica, you are doing okay. Thank you. We will make sure that Jessica is okay. So, and we will give you guys an update a little bit later. Okay.
So there she goes.
We will make sure that
she's pretty clearly out of it here. She's losing her vision. I happen to know what that's like. So yeah, before you black out, you can really kind of the tunnel vision setting in, and I think she's losing her vision and balance. So here it is one more time.
Okay, we'll come back to me right now, and we'll make sure that, Jessica, you are doing okay. Thank you. We will make
difficulty breathing as well. Colleen is saying that even though she posted on Twitter when she got jabbed, yeah, you know what? I think I did see that, and I should have pulled it in here. But yeah, if I recall correctly, I think she's triple jabbed according to her own Twitter posts. But don't quote me on that one, folks. If I didn't bring the receipts, then you should look into it for yourself. Okay, and this is the same thing. 1 second. Okay, this is another one out there. let's see, this is Jacques Tietz, and he says, we should absolutely go, quote, guns blazing, close quote, into treating, preventing, curing serious disease. We move far too slowly here, in my opinion. The issue here is the COVID-19 wasn't very serious. At least it wasn't very lethal. It appears in this case the cure was worse than the disease. So he's got an excerpt here from a paper in Environmental Research. It says age stratified infection fatality rate of COVID-19 in the non-elderly population. And here are a few highlights here. It says across 31 systematically identified national seroprevalent studies in the pre-vaccinated era, the median infection fatality of COVID-19 was estimated to be 0.034% for people age 0 to 59 years, and 0.095% for those age 0 to 69 years. So those are some pretty low rates. Very much in line with what I was understanding early on in the pandemic. I mean, the fatality rate for my age bracket was actually lower than that of the flu. So it wasn't a hard decision for me to stay away from that unknown risk associated with the mRNA therapy. So but anyway, the next one says the median IFR was 0.0003% at 0 to 19 years, 0.002% at 20 to 29 years, 0.011% at 30 to 39 years, and 0.035% at 40 to 49 years. 0.123% at 50 to 59 years, and 0.506% at 60 to 69 years. So the only people who even had any kind of a risk, really, it doesn't even get up into the 10th of a percentile until after you're over 50. At a global level, the pre-vaccination IFR may have been as low as 0.03% and 0.07% for 0 to 59 and 0 to 69-year-old people, respectively. These IFR estimates in non-elderly populations are lower than previous calculations had suggested. So even lower than we thought to begin with. And we vaccinated, well, they're saying, upwards of 90% of the population. That's at least double anything we ever did for the flu. With this unknown risk associated jab. And for what? For to prevent these kinds of rates. So the balance of harms really doesn't support that course of action. It looks like there was more harm done with the vaccine than we ever would have encountered from the virus. So this is still trending on Twitter. I think Twitter is looking better and better every day. I still hear some reports of right-leaning people being censored, and I'm just willing to say, okay, give it time, guys. Like it's probably going to take a while to really clean it all up completely. It's not like throwing a switch. It's a very complex system, so it's going to take a time to find all the switches. So this is John Albert. He's saying mRNA technology is toxic to humans. Lipid nanoparticle plus gene sequence, whether for corona, influenza, or any other virus, it's toxic. We cannot afford to alter the immune system of humanity. #pureblood.
Coronavirus, influenza, RSV. Really quickly, human cells were meant to make human proteins. A lipid nanoparticle plus a gene sequence, whether it be for coronavirus, influenza, RSV, whatever the virus may be, human cells were meant to make human proteins. The lipid nanoparticles are toxic. Obviously, the spike protein from this is toxic, but we cannot afford to alter the immune system of humanity going forward. This is not a good platform. This is not good science. Thank you. Really quickly,
Okay, so there you have it. Coming out, and here is this Robert F. Kennedy? Yeah, RFK. RFK Jr. explains why Fauci had such a problem with early treatment, and we'll just go ahead and let him speak for himself here.
Tony Fauci's problem is this. There's a little-known federal law that says you cannot give an emergency use authorization to a vaccine if there is any medication approved for any purpose that is shown effective against the target disease. So if Tony Fauci or anybody had admitted that hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin are effective against COVID, it would have been illegal for them to give the emergency use authorizations to the vaccines, and they could never have gotten them approved. And it would have been, a 200 billion enterprise that would have collapsed.
That is fascinating. I mean,
so that's what it is right there. If I remember this from the hydroxychloroquine days. Now it was on Tucker Carlson, and I was already tracking it. I mean, the studies were being published. The hydroxychloroquine was being shown to be very effective against the virus. And as soon as that word tumbled out of Donald Trump's mouth, the whole media went nuts. And we had some Democrat donor on the TV who killed her husband with fish tank cleaner, telling everybody it was Donald Trump's fault for saying hydroxychloroquine. And they did the same thing with ivermectin, saying that it was a dewormer. I encountered that attitude on the street, the last protest that I attended on Saturday. That's it. What can I say? I mean, the TV is the most awesome propaganda force the world has ever seen. It's unbelievable to see even the level of willful ignorance at this point that people are so invested in the narrative.
I have been covering this very closely now for all of the 2 years. That's the first I've heard that. I mean, in your book. So he would not have gotten emergency use authorization for the vaccine if the medical community had been saying ivermectin works. It is an effective treatment for COVID.
Well, the medical community, a lot of it was saying that. I mean, there's 17,000 doctors who've signed a petition, and there are so many peer-reviewed publications now that consistently say that, but he had to aggressively crusade against it to kind of drown out those reports by saying it's a horse medication, it's, people are taking it and it's dangerous and it's overdosing people. And,
well, why did he keep saying it? Why did he keep saying it after he got his authorization?
Well, even if you have the emergency use authorization, the law appears to say you can't have it anymore if there's a functioning medication. So, that may be why. Again, I try not to look in his head, but I do. There's a very, very strong incentive for him to kill ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. And, there are many doctors, including Harvey Reich of Yale, is one of the leading biostatisticians, epidemiologists in the world. Peter McCulloch, who is the most published doctor in the history of the world in his specialty. Pierre Corey, these doctors who've treated tens of thousands of COVID patients successfully, they consistently say, and the science supports this, that 500,000 Americans did not need to die.
So there you go. Okay, I saw this making the rounds, so I just couldn't help myself. These two lovely ladies here, I'm not sure where this even is, but they're holding up a sign that says, unvaxxed sperm is the next Bitcoin. And I mean, I've heard this rumor too, that unvaxxed blood is in very high demand. And especially when we start to consider the fallout in terms of human fertility of what the jab is going to produce. We still don't know the full fallout. We probably won't for a couple of generations. So fellas, start making your way to the sperm bank, I guess. And I guess, if it serves my country, then I'd be willing to get my vasectomy reversed and become Genghis Khan. So there you go, ladies. You want one of these? That's me. I was 3 or 4, I think. So yeah, there you go. Let's get a bidding war started. Okay, that's enough Fun for me. All right. So here we have, this is Biden back in the news, and this all relates back to Spygate. And Spygate was when the Obama administration turned the power of the state against peaceful American citizens yet again. He had a very strong history of doing this. Dinesh D'Souza spent 3 years in jail over breaking some election laws, donating too much to candidates and through surrogates. But he's the only guy who's ever gone to prison over anything like that, or even got to court, I think, for having done that. And, he assassinated an American citizen, Anwar the American al-Awlaki. I didn't shed a tear for the guy. He was the mastermind behind the Fort Hood shooting that Obama tried to say was workplace violence and due to depression. But anyway, he was notorious for turning the power of the state against political dissidents and his political opponents, even when they were peaceful, law-abiding American citizens. And he did this in particular against Donald Trump during the lead up to the 2016 election. So here's a few tweets on that, because this is all kind of more information is coming out about the kind of abuses that are taking place. So here we go.
Trump appointed U.S. Attorney John Lausch. There is breaking news tonight from the Justice Department. Attorney General Merrick Garland has assigned Trump-appointed U.S. Attorney John Lausch to review classified documents from President Biden's vice presidential office at the University of Pennsylvania Biden Center for Diplomacy and Global Engagement. The classified documents were discovered by President Biden's personal attorneys on November 2nd, the days before the midterm elections. Once the materials were discovered, the White House counsel's office notified the National Archives, who took possession of them. We have much more on this breaking news story later in the show.
Okay. And there are a couple of more here that just below that. Here's Tucker, and this, as it relates to the Mar-a-Lago raid.
Or Brazil, certainly not in Ukraine. You remember back to August and the atrocities the media told us about, not in Mexico or Brazil, certainly not in Ukraine, but at Mar-a-Lago. Remember that? Classified documents were discovered, illicit classified documents, including top secret cocktail napkins at Mar-a-Lago. There was even, and we're quoting the federal indictment, a birthday dinner menu found somewhere near the First Lady's closet. Now, the Washington Post first reported that nuclear codes or relevant nuclear materials, secret ones, were discovered there, and that's why a former CIA director and Michael Beschloss, the historian, suggested it could be time for Donald Trump to be executed by electric chair. And for sure, and this was the consensus in Washington, once these documents were discovered, this crime was unearthed. There was no possibility Donald Trump could ever again run for office. He needed to go to jail. Every person connected to the Biden administration told us that, including Joe Biden himself. What data was there in there that may compromise sources and methods, Biden asked. So as Biden was saying that, it turns out that he was, and you'll be shocked to hear this, doing exactly the same thing that he accused Donald Trump of doing. Joe Biden was storing classified documents in a private office at a fake think tank that has been set up for him at the University of Pennsylvania. That fake think tank is called the Penn Biden Center for Diplomacy and Global Engagement at the University of Pennsylvania. Now, we should tell you we don't know exactly what these classified documents are. And unlike Michael Beschloss and the former head of the CIA, we're not going to speculate. But according to CNN, they were very sensitive. Quote, the classified materials included some top secret files with the sensitive compartmented information designation, also known as SCI, which is used for highly sensitive information obtained from intelligence sources.
So SCI is, it's sensitive compartmented information. I always said compartmentalized, but SCI. So I had a top secret clearance my entire career, and it's not enough to have the clearance to get access to the sensitive information. The clearance is kind of like what you need, broadly speaking. I mean, even the clerks have secret clearance now. So they can work in certain areas. And then we compartmentalize other areas For the sensitive information and to get access to those areas, you need an additional level of clearance, which is your special access. So I had like a TSSCA, special access. So that's your need to know. So this is not just top secret that anybody could access, but it's compartmentalized and only people with a special clearance can access it, because that special clearance, that SCI, is your need to know. When you're dealing with the sensitive stuff, then not only do you need the clearance, but you have to have the need to know. So this isn't just top secret reports that might be accessible to anybody who has access to a particular top secret network. But this is the compartmentalized stuff that you have to have the need to know for as well. So it's not just top secret. It's not above that, but it's a caveat that we do. That's what we do, is we caveat top secret beyond the clearance level, but we add the need to know on top of it with the caveat. So it could be U.S. only. It could be like, this wouldn't be Canadian eyes only, but that's a designation, or Five Eyes, U.S., Canada, Australia, UK, New Zealand. So those kinds of caveats we put on in addition to, but that's not really what. The sensitive compartmentalized information is the SCI information is. But those are examples of how we handle the top secret level clearance information. And to think that this was not only top secret, but also special access required, and he was storing it, totally inappropriately, totally mishandled classified information. And if you want to see what happens normally when you do that, you can look up General Petraeus. I think he paid a $500,000 fine just for mishandling information in this fashion while he was the head of the CIA. And also, I remember there was a case of, when it's one of the proles, when it's somebody in uniform who's just, got a couple of years in the military, and he takes a picture of an engine room for a nuclear submarine because just to have on his phone and not to post anywhere or share with anybody ever. That guy ended up getting 5 years. So that's the kind of that's the level of seriousness with which we treat this kind of information.
So what exactly were these materials? Were they the nuclear codes? We're probably going to find out pretty soon, because there's no question Merrick Garland will unleash one of his signature pre-dawn raids on the University of Pennsylvania at any moment. Because it's a national security threat. Merrick Garland will get right on that. But actually, Penn may be a national security event. We know you're very impressed your nephew got in, but Penn as an institution takes an awful lot of money from the Chinese Communist Party. Not making that up. In recent years, Penn has received more than $50 million from anonymous Chinese donors. So the question is, were those donors peering at the classified documents, the national security secrets that Joe Biden had been stashing at the fake think tank that Penn set up for him? How much access did they have exactly to these documents? We're very much looking forward to the Washington Post expose on that.
I appreciate Tucker's candor and his humor. Yeah, that is the thing. I mean, he sets up the contrast very well when it's President Trump who has the authority to declassify documents, holding, because I think he's just a hoarder, holding some previously classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. You get a pre-dawn raid and CNN gets the heads up to have their cameras ready. But when it's an analogous situation with Joe Biden, who as vice president did not have that authority, I don't believe, then we we get a media scramble, a little bit of spin, and that's about it. And here is Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's a right-winger down in the States there, who gets smeared and slandered quite a bit, so you know that she's effective. And Gen Xer as well. So here she is on the whole affair.
I just want to ask you really quickly about the news that just broke that Joe Biden, who's trying to put Donald Trump in jail for having classified documents at his home, also had classified documents at his office at the University of Pennsylvania. What do you make of this?
Well, this is a huge story. It's very serious. As a matter of fact, Joe Biden conceivably stole those documents. What people need to understand is the President of the United States is the only one that can declassify documents, not the Vice President. For Joe Biden to steal documents and have possession of them, this is a serious investigation, and the communists at NARA can't hide it anymore. And Merrick Garland and the Department of Justice, they have to be held accountable if they don't treat Joe Biden exactly the same way they're treating President Trump. It's ridiculous and it's shameful.
Merrick Garland is shameful. The fact he's the Attorney General is shameful, I would say.
He should be impeached. Yes.
At least. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, thank you very much for coming on today.
Thank you, and go Dogs.
Southern woman. I'm not sure exactly which state it is, actually, but obviously a Southern woman. I dated for a little while down in the Southern U.S., and they're very nice ladies. I'll say that. The Southern hospitality, it's a real thing. So, what Spygate tells us about the Google, Facebook, and Twitter files. Okay, so this is the Federalist, and they're tying it all together for us, I think. So a big tech lawsuit and the Twitter files are showing Democrats used the same process against Donald Trump in 2020 that they falsely claimed he had used to win in 2016. Cross-reference new information from the Twitter files and State Attorney General's lawsuit against big tech with what we now know about Spygate from years of investigations reinforced and enlarges shocking conclusions about the corruption of American government. Those two illuminate further how the U.S. bureaucracy interferes in elections, in these cases by pushing communications monopolies to shut down discourse that undermines the administrative state. Louisiana Attorney General Jeff Landry's latest is evidence demonstrating the federal government's use of big tech communications monopolies to censor its critics was not at all limited to Twitter. He posted an email showing the Biden White House asking Facebook to shut down Tucker Carlson's speech on its platform, and Facebook employee apparently complying within just a few hours. So here he is here, showing the email. And it says, as soon as we've been on the phone, the top post about the vaccines today is Tucker Carlson saying they don't work. Yesterday, it was Tommy Lahren saying they won't take one. This is exactly why I want to know what, quote, reduction, close quote, actually looks like. If reduction means, quote, pumping our most vaccine hesitant audience with Tucker Carlson saying it doesn't work, then I'm sure it's, then I'm not sure it's reduction. So there you go. That's the administrative state. Flaherty, Rob Flaherty, he's reaching out to big tech and telling them how disappointed he is in the job they're doing, suppressing important information. So, I think I lost my article there. Okay. Now, on the other side of things, we're going to look at a little bit of the propaganda from up north here. And this is Kelly McFarland. Now, usually pretty good. And this is the National Compost. But I want to point out that while they put on airs like they're right wingers, they are, in the bubble. They're kind of the cosmopolitan elites. Ultimately, I mean, they have their offices like in Ottawa, for example, and it's in the same building as multiple other media outlets. So anyway, they're the largest recipient of Trudeau bailout funds. So it's take that into consideration whenever you're reading them. Like they're very reluctant to bite the hand that feeds them. So Kelly McFarland says, Morneau confirms image-obsessed Trudeau's management is sorely lacking. While Trudeau's performance skills were superb, his management and interpersonal communication abilities were sorely lacking. And Jordan Peterson was putting up a video there sometime in the last few days about how when he looks at Trudeau, he sees an actor. And that's just what I've always seen. I'm not going to say I told you so. Here we go. I have no intimate understanding of the mental process in our prime minister, but if I was getting the sort of feedback on my job performance that he's been getting, I'd certainly take a moment for honest reflection. Now, at this point, I think he's scrambling for survival, especially after the invocation of the Emergencies Act. This guy has really kind of been taken for a ride. I think like he's just the guy who reads the lines. He's not really the one pulling the strings and making the decisions, but he's in survival mode now. Because it looks like he just broke the law. So, according to a recent survey by a Nanos organization, more than half of Canadians want Justin Trudeau to step aside and let someone else take the Liberal Party into the next election, whenever that might be. Almost as many think the country is headed in the wrong direction. Now, Nanos, I've shown here before, he's an insider. His credibility has been completely demolished. He basically polls his break room to get the statistics that the machine needs in order to push this particular narrative. So here they are pushing the narrative that all we need is a new leader for the Liberal Party and we're all set. An Ipsos poll garnered similar results. Half of the country wants yet another election this year, even though we've had 2 in the past 3 years, and 54% want a different Liberal leader to fight it. The month will see a new book by former Finance Minister Bill Morneau, who left the government in unhappy circumstances just as the pandemic hit, praising Trudeau as a great performer but a lousy manager, his focus on short-term partisan gains over sound policy and long-term benefits. Though thrilled at joining the Trudeau government in 2015, Morneau writes, quote, "Soon after the election, I came to realize that while his performance skills were superb, his management and interpersonal communication abilities were sorely lacking," close quote. So he's not a leader, he's an actor. Back to the article. Echoing similar points to those made by Jody Wilson-Raybould, the former Justice Minister and Attorney General who lost her job for refusing to buckle to demands she considered unethical and possibly illegal, Morneau portrays Trudeau as a distant and isolated, prone to issuing, I think they mean dictates to the cabinet minister rather than inviting consensus, fiercely partisan and keen on winning short-term punch-ups that produce positive, if fleeting, headlines. He suffers, according to the book, from an, quote, inability or lack of interest in forging relationships, close quote, with, quote, me and, as far as I could tell, the rest of his cabinet, close quote. Morneau's, I was speaking earlier about what's going on in China and Russia with isolated leaders, and we can see that trend here as well. I think Trudeau has kind of burned all his bridges at this point and isolated himself even from the broader Liberal machine. So, he's like a drowning man reaching for a chip bag at this point. Throw him a lifeline, but don't get too close. And that's just it. He's still in that seat. He still wields a lot of power. And when a guy in that position who is of such a low character as Trudeau's finds himself in survival mode, there's really no telling what he'll do. So we need to be very cautious in our approach here. We're dealing with a frightened little forest creature. So better to, provide him with an escape route so you can shoo him away than corner him. So he does another Emergency Measures Act on us. So Morneau's concern is that Ottawa's focus on popularity over performance is feeding an extended slide in the country's ability to compete with its rivals, maintain a strong economy, and produce the money needed to pay for its social programs. In 2019, Canada fell from the top 10 in an index of the world's most competitive countries and was down to 14th by last year. The Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development recently ranked Canada last out of 38 countries in per capita economic growth and predicted it would be, quote, the worst performing advanced country over 2020 to 2030 and the 3 decades after, close quote. So pretty bleak. And Morneau is the guy who's taken that cushy retirement job with the OECD. That's who they're referencing here, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. As has often been noted, we have a prime minister who once boasted of his lack of interest in monetary policy, doubled the debt in just 7 years, insisted there was, quote, no business case, close quote, to sell liquid natural gas to Germany, which faced a frigid winter thanks to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, only to see Berlin sign a 15-year deal with Qatar and agreed to a dental program at a potential cost of billions of dollars solely to win temporary NDP support for the Liberals minority government. Yeah, what a boondoggle. There is no evidence any of this has had an impact on Trudeau's plan to lead the party into the next election, to date of which is not entirely in his control. Supporters can point out that Canadians are even less enthused about Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, whose standing is low among men and lower among women. Morneau says Poilievre's methods are, quote, in conflict with almost every political value we have enjoyed as a nation for over 150 years, close quote. And while Tories may lead the Liberals into overall voter preference, that's largely due to overwhelming support in Western Canada, which it has repeatedly proven inadequate to win elections. Yeah, so it's all kind of framing this like Pierre Poilievre is, the bigot that is antithetical to Canadian values, and who the hell is Morneau to talk about conflict with political values when he's the guy who set up the whole SNC Lavalin thing, right? That was when the Lavalin executives traveled to France to track him down and speak to him in person about arranging for deferred prosecution agreement. And that was when the legislation started, as far as I can tell. It was after he made contact with them in that one-on-one meeting. That was when all this legislation about deferred prosecution agreements came in, and who's going to be the first beneficiary of that? Well, it's SNC Lavalin. Back to the article. The odds then would seem to favor another bitterly fought race with lots of divisiveness and wedge issues, followed by another minority, either Liberal or Conservative, depending on how the ball bounces. Canadians appear too weary of Trudeau to accord him a majority, and Poilievre's poor standing in Ontario isn't the stuff of incipient triumph. Having just elected Poilievre, the Tories aren't about to dump him. But should Liberals be happy once again putting their future in the hands of a leader whose standing is in steady decline, whose vote count has fallen with each new election, who has trailed the Tories twice in succession in both popular vote and share of the ballots, and whose government struggles at even basic functions like paying its employees, keeping airports running, and issuing passports? They have an alternative and some potentially attractive candidates. But while Liberals have been through ugly leadership wars in the past, see Chrétien versus Turner, Martin versus Chrétien, today's compliant caucus demonstrates no hint of a taste of rebellion. The decision thus remains at the top with a leader who, as we've seen, is poorly disposed towards opinions that trouble his own. No wonder the OECD and others foresee little chance of Canada scooting up the list of productive, competitive countries. We've been taken with this ideology, and like I said, it's functionally speaking, it's a theocracy at this point, and we have a return to the witch hunts that we see everywhere. Okay, and here's a little bit of sad news from the veteran community. This is Rebel News reporting almost 2,500 veterans homeless across Canada. The number, however, is much likely higher, as most recent data available is a 2016 national shelter study of shelter residents that self-identifies as having served in the military. And this is an issue that's pretty near and dear to my heart. I spent 3 years helping homeless veterans off the streets of Ottawa while I was there. And I was pretty heavily involved in the organization that was doing it. I was leading the chapter for Ottawa, and we were the case study for the other chapters elsewhere in the country. A lot of that really, the outreach and everything really came to a grinding halt with the implementation of lockdowns. And, you can see it on the street. You can see that the homeless population, the people that are at the lowest rungs of our society, are the ones that are the most impacted. You want to talk about a homeless problem? You see what they have there in Ottawa right now. It's pretty incredible. And a lot of people that I knew around that time, they were having trouble keeping their apartments and things like that when they were just kind of hanging on, and they have to move over the other side of the river to go to Gatineau. Nobody wants to do that. To find something a little cheaper, and the shelters are just they're busting at the seams, right? So here's the article. According to Blacklock's, which first reported the astonishing number Monday morning, a subsequent census on homeless veterans was started, then delayed, and never completed because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Veterans Affairs staff estimate the number to have doubled since 2016. Yeah, I would say it's at least doubled. And if I recall correctly, there was a point in time count that was done in Ottawa before the pandemic, and they were showing numbers of about 18% of people staying in homeless shelters identified as having veteran status. So that's not necessarily confirmed through Veterans Affairs, but we collaborated with them on that a little bit, and the way they were asking questions was more in line with proper identification of people having had service. So a lot of people don't think of themselves as veterans because maybe they were just reservists for a few years while they were in high school and university to get a little bit of money for their education, and they never really deployed overseas, so they don't really think of themselves as veterans. But in fact, you do get access to some tier of benefits under the Veterans Charter. You meet their criteria of having graduated basic training and been honorably released, and even in some cases, I think if you're not honorably released, you will still get some kind of veteran status and some access to some tier of benefits. So anyway, here's the tweet. Blacklock's reporter says documents at Veterans English Canada counts 2,400 homeless vets, admit likely more as emergency fund to provide parkas. Food for ex-military goes over budget. The Veterans Emergency Fund, which receives $1 million annual budget, is consistently underfunded, and the application to the program for help are larger than the 2016 survey, which pegged the number of homeless veterans at 2,400. So here's another tweet from Mr. Surveillance. It says, Justin Trudeau in 2019, we are fighting, quote, we are fighting veterans in court because they're asking for more than we can give, close quote. Justin Trudeau spending since 2019, $689 billion. Yes, that's almost $1 trillion. And
my name is Brock
one of our brothers, Brock.
I'm a retired corporal with the Princess Patricia Canadian Light Infantry out of here in Edmonton, 1st Battalion. I served in the Canadian Armed Forces for 7 years. I deployed in Afghanistan back in 2009 until April 3rd, where I was obviously severely wounded by a roadside bomb or improvised explosive. As you can see, I've lost my left leg. I have 58% soft tissue loss and 88% nerve damage on my right leg. Back in August 24th, 2015, you made the promise, and I'll quote it here, no veteran will be forced to fight their own government for the support and compensation they have earned. Yet you are still currently in a legal battle with veterans regarding equal support and compensation to their peers. You have ISIL or ISIS members coming into a reintegration program. You did a backdoor deal with Omar Khadr with not even stepping into the courtroom. Because honestly, Mr. Prime Minister, I was prepared to be injured in the line of duty when I joined the military. Nobody forced me to join the military. I was prepared to be killed in action. What I wasn't prepared for, Mr. Prime Minister, is Canada turning its back on me.
On a couple of elements you brought up. First of all, why are we still fighting against certain veterans groups in court? Because they are asking for more than we are able to give right now. They are asking for more than we, well, no, hang on. You're asking for honest answers. Why are we still fighting against certain veterans groups in court? Because they're asking.
Okay, I think we're all kind of familiar with that clip too. And you know, if anybody out there knows Brock, I'd love to have him on the program sometime. We all love what he did there. So it'd be great to have him on here to get his thoughts on everything that's going on, I guess, and just see how he's doing. But this is part of the campaign of demoralization, I think, guys. I think that a big part of the PSYOP is to demoralize veterans in particular. I think I make that pretty clear in the video that I show very often in the introduction there, which is the politics of genocide. There has been this kind of campaign of stigmatization of veterans, be it through their mental health issues or just kind of their general characteristics, like the fact that they tend to be predominantly white males who maybe say some things that make you feel uncomfortable, like, get your head out of your ass and things like that. Also that they might have an interest in firearms. So these are pretty... these sound like pretty standard Canadian rural boys that would have an interest in military service. So I think that is an element of the PSYOP that we're having to deal with here. And like I said, don't take it personally, okay? If this is a war, like I'm saying it is, that historians are going to look back at this time and say that we were already in World War III, then it's time to put your war cap on and just not let this stuff get to you personally, because if you do that, then that's how we lose. Okay, back to the article. Blacklock's reports of 2,576 appeals for funding over 2 years, and a total of 1,902 were approved. Most payments were issued within 2 days. Quote, for necessities such as food, clothing, shelter, medical care, or expenses not otherwise covered, close quote, according to the federal valuation of the program. So this is the Veterans Emergency Fund program that they're talking about. Here's a tweet from Tucker. I'm not going to go into that right now. And it says, recently the Trudeau government has come under fire for offering veterans medical assistance in dying as opposed to proper medical care. To call on the government to support our veterans instead of offering them medically assisted suicide, please visit www.helpnothomicide.com. So props to Rebel News for setting that up for us. And like I said, I do think that this is part of the PSYOP. It's to stigmatize and demoralize all the people who would most likely stand up for Canadian values and human rights in Canada in the event of a communist takeover. So here's True North, and they're reporting national defense event speaker says Canada, quote, completely infected, close quote, by white supremacy. So here you go. This is the kind of thing that I'm talking about. They're colonizing the military. They just did a massive purge with the vaccine mandate. So they purged all the dissidents, and now they're bringing in foreign nationals, I guess, non-citizens. Is that what they're? Yeah, it's non-citizens. And people who don't necessarily, I don't know how they're going to get them to even get their top secret security clearance when you need to be able to show 5 years of residency and provide all these references. And CSIS is going to call your neighbors from your old neighborhoods that you didn't even list on the application. That was my experience when I first got in the military. I mean, it's just not a workable solution. And I've talked before about how this is what happened at the end of the Roman Empire when the soldiers essentially deserted because they were like the leadership turned against them and turned against the empire and made it all about themselves. And it was Game of Thrones. And the soldiers were like, this isn't the country that I signed up to serve. And what did they do? But they said, well, you're easily replaced. And they started filling the ranks of the military with the barbarians. That's what they called them. They were the Germanic tribes, the Thracians, probably not Russian. That would have been a little too far north, but they were the people from outside of the empire who weren't raised by it, didn't feel that debt of service for the empire having educated them and made them the people that they were. They didn't feel that debt of service, and the whole thing just kind of falls apart from there, right? It's a slow collapse. And this is what's going on inside the halls of National Defense Headquarters. The Department of National Defense recently held an event where public sector executives were lectured about their implicit racial biases and told how Canada was, quote, completely infected, close quote, by the specter of white supremacy. Who are the white supremacist organizations? Who are the most prominent white supremacists out there in the ecosystem? This is all just a bunch of made up nonsense, of course. And I've shown in the politics of genocide in that quick clip how they're broadening the definitions. The definitions coming out of academia now of radical right wing extremism basically boil down to right wing and or conservative memes, and that's just it. On their side, you know, violence is mostly peaceful, like the fires of Kenosha, and on our side, rhetoric is violence. So that's the double standard that they're applying. So a recap of the December 13th executive town hall event quotes keynote speaker Rachel Zellers, St. Mary's University social justice professor, saying white supremacy comes, quote, in all shapes and sizes, close quote. She was specifically referring to the Freedom Convoy protests, according to the recap provided by National Defense. Yeah, great. So they're indoctrinating the force into a communist ideology. Quote, white supremacy is a global problem that has completely infected our nation, close quote, said Zellers. Quote, it comes in all shapes and sizes and cleans up real good, close quote. So anything we say, anything we don't like is white supremacy. And it is the heresy of the new religion, the theocracy that we're living under right now. Hate is the new heresy. And once you're accused of hate, you get witch hunted. So Zellers was joined on stage by Deputy Minister of National Defense Bill Matthews and Associate Deputy Minister Stephanie Beck. While responding to the talk on Twitter, National Post columnist and Quiet editor Jonathan Kay quipped about the Canadian military's combat readiness. Quote, the next time Canada goes to war, we're going to blow our enemies away with our knowledge of anti-oppressive praxis, intersectionality, decolonization, and trauma-informed pronoun usage, close quote, tweeted Kay. Very well done, sir. The talk is in line with the department's growing preoccupation with rooting out alleged systems of racism from ranks and decision-making. So we have a situation here where they're bringing people in from non-white countries, from outside of Canada, from non-Western countries, essentially, and they're filling the ranks with these people, and they're telling them that the civilization that they've come to is white supremacist and evil. So they're indoctrinating them into this anti-Western ideology, and then what? So we're talking about if Canada goes to war. Well, if Canada goes to war with another country, then we're in trouble. But is that what we're setting ourselves up for? Because it doesn't look like that to me. It sounds like we're setting ourselves up for something else, probably inside Canada, to deal with the problem that they're obsessing over, which is the people here. The talk is in line with the department's growing preoccupation with rooting out alleged systemic racism from the ranks and decision-making. And I'll say that the only time I ever heard the N-word in my entire career was when I went back and looked at those tapes from Somalia, which was actually after I retired. So I never heard the N-word in my entire military career. And I went back and I watched those tapes from Somalia, and guess what? It's all over the place. Those guys are just N-word, 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 all over the place, and showing off thear Aryan Brotherhood tattoos. And my position is that was the boomer generation, not the rest of us. You know, my generation, along with the millennials, were in Canada's longest war of 12 and a half years in Afghanistan. And I defy anyone to show us the tapes from there where we raped, tortured, and killed kids, or dropped those kinds of slurs. Now, I'll say that the language was pretty colorful, but it wasn't like that. It was more like you see in Hotel Rwanda, where they say they call them skinnies over the radio, that kind of thing. Very tongue-in-cheek, and it's a coping strategy for soldiers. Black humor is a coping strategy. So that's what I saw, but when you look at the tapes from Somalia, it's something much darker than that. Anyway, that's the kind of projection that I see taking place from the highest ranks. That was their generation of soldiers that engaged in that kind of behavior. That was their generation of officers who gave those orders to shoot those starving Somalian children as they fled with provisions, quote, between the skirts and the flip-flops. That wasn't the rest of us. But anyway, I digress. Rant over. The report also recommended the military doesn't hire members from certain religious organizations, including Christian religious leaders. Quote, indigenous peoples have suffered unimaginable generational trauma and genocide at the hands of Christian religious leaders through initiatives such as residential school and Indian Day school programs, close quote, the report stated. Okay, I'm just going to keep going. The year prior to the department also held an, quote, ask me anything, close quote, event on the topic of, quote, white fragility, close quote. I'm also, so what I am asking is like the unimaginable intergenerational trauma and stuff like that. Like there was the collapse of the Roman Empire occurred concurrent to the explosion of the caliphate. That is is it the seven-headed Hydra in, or is it five-headed? I get mixed up sometimes. But no, it's seven. It's seven-headed Hydra in Revelations for the seven caliphs of the caliphate that just exploded out of Arabia right around that same time and collapsed the Eastern Roman Empire, which is the Byzantine Empire, and the capital of which would have been Constantinople in modern day Istanbul. So do we get like reparations for that in the West? Do we get is intergenerational a trauma that we suffered? Like we're talking like what was the collapse of now Constantinople stood for over 1100 years, and I think it was about 1452 that the walls finally crumbled under the guns of General Mustafa, I want to say. And then right after that, he headed west and was eventually stopped at the gates of Vienna in what Christopher Hitchens reasonably speculates was 9/11. So yeah, what about all that intergenerational trauma? You know, Spain changed hands multiple times. Christopher Columbus was Spanish, and he set out looking for an alternate trade route, you know, to reconnect the West Roman Empire with its trading partner, India in the East. And anyway, so I could go on and on about that. And what about the reparations for the white Americans, for example, who smashed the Barbary pirate slave trade that dominated the coasts of the Mediterranean and took slaves, more white slaves than black slaves were ever taken in Africa. And so like the first American foreign war that was ever fought was the Battle of Tripoli, and that was in conjunction with the British, and that was to smash the Caliphate's Barbary pirate slave trade, and by Barbary meaning the North African Barbary states along the south of the Mediterranean there, which was previously Roman. Yeah, it's all very ridiculous when you consider the full context of human history. What they're doing is they're taking a little microcosm of prosperity that recurred after the collapse of the Roman Empire. We eventually found our way back to the Enlightenment, and they're saying that the prosperity that we've enjoyed since then is tainted by our white supremacy and white fragility. And it is all very much, I think, in line with the basic principles of propaganda, right? That it's invocative of the emotions, that it plays on the emotions quite a bit. And so that's why you can't let it get to you, right? Because if you do that, then they win. And on the other side, this appeals to all of the darker elements of human nature. For example, let's say, the deadly sin of envy and the deadly sin of wrath. That's how communism works, is it appeals to all those darker elements of human nature and gets people into those emotional states from which it can be hard to really break them, especially when it comes to the phenomenon of, say, moral certitude. I would say that the root of all evil is moral certitude. So here's the Iowa Standard, reporting from south of the 49 in the United States here. Department of Defense rescinds COVID shot mandate for the military. So this is a sign of positive things to come, folks, because The U.S., they kind of, where they go, we go, essentially, in our own way. But yeah, broadly speaking, we go where they go. So, forced by Congress against his will, as Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has rescinded the COVID-19 shot mandate for all military service members. The action comes after Joe Biden, who strongly opposed the repealing of the mandate, signed into law the National Defense Authorization Act on December 23, 2022. Section 525 of the NDAA requires the Secretary of Defense to rescind the mandate that members of the U.S. Armed Forces receive the COVID-19 shots. Secretary Austin issued a memorandum on August 24, 2021, directing all service members to receive the COVID-19 shot. Secretary Austin is not backing down from his support of the mandate, wherein he and Joe Biden tried to force every service member to receive the shots. Multiple courts have ruled that the DoD and various military branches violated the Federal Religious Freedom Restoration Act by denying requests for religious accommodation. So the same thing happened in Canada's military. They denied all the requests for religious accommodation. The Public Affairs Guidance Memorandum issued from the Department of Defense states that the Secretary, quote, stands by his decision to mandate COVID-19 vaccination in August of 2021, close quote. The DoD memo states that, quote, Secretary Austin continues to encourage all of our service members, civilian employees, and contractor personnel to get vaccinated and boosted to ensure the readiness of our total force, close quote. The DoD, quote, will continue to encourage all personnel and family members to stay up to date on their COVID-19 vaccinations, including boosters, close quote. The Secretary has been clear in his support for maintaining the COVID-19 vaccination mandate. However, the department will fully comply with the NDAA. The DoD memo falsely states that, quote, COVID-19 vaccines were developed using a range of methods and are now widely available to service members to provide options for individuals with medical or religious concerns, close quote. Every option used aborted fetal cells in their testing and or development, Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, and Novavax. In addition to aborted fetal cells, many religious requesters objected to the experimental mRNA shots of Pfizer and Moderna. The DoD continues to misrepresent the facts and has continually violated the law. And the broader picture, I think, that the mRNA shots really fit into here is that of social engineering, and that never goes well. Our would-be social engineers generally hate us, and that's they're playing God, right? They're trying to create us in their image. They're trying to mold us in their image, and it just doesn't work for human populations. We need strategies that are developed in the full light of a modern understanding of human nature, not a denial of it. So the DoD memo continues with misrepresentations. According to the DoD memo, quote, as of December 1st, 2022, the military services reported that approximately 13,000 active duty and 6,000 reserve component religious accommodations requested have been adjudicated with approval rates across all components as listed. Army 6.04%, Navy 1.02%, Air Force and Space Force 2.31%. Marine Corps 0.52%. Quote, approximately 5,000 active duty and 12,500 reserve component religious accommodation requests are still pending adjudication across all military departments, close quote. The information submitted to the courts contradicts the above numbers. In fact, while medical exemptions have been granted, no religious exemptions have been granted except for a handful that were already been processed to leave the military. No military members who intends to remain in the service has received a religious accommodation. So this is how they manipulate the stats all the time, folks. And they're doing the same thing in the Canadian military with their vaccine compliance numbers, and their the way that they released everybody, the way they fired everybody was totally egregious. I mean, my entire career, it's been effectively impossible to fire a service member through the administrative process, the remedial measures process. And that process does, in fact, have the power to release somebody on 30 days notice. And I've never seen it happen in my entire career. And then we saw it happen en masse. I mean, I don't think it's ever happened in the Canadian military history. And we saw it happen en masse for refusal to take the vaccine. And those who submitted their voluntary releases, who submitted a memo to quit within that time and space, they were granted their request to voluntary release. So the numbers the numbers of how many people left the force, I think, are dramatically reduced just by the way that they manipulate their statistics on this. So they'll say we fired this many people, but they're not telling you how many people quit on their own. And we're allowed to do that under those conditions. So the DoD memo also has a FAQ session, which includes the following question. What happens to adverse actions in the military personnel records for current or former service members who refuse to be vaccinated? Answer. Uniform Code of Military Justice actions remain in the service member's official military personnel file. Okay, so we're getting into the weeds here a little bit, but this is a sign of good things to come, I think, for Canada, because, like I said, where the U.S. goes, basically the free world goes, and that is true for Canada more so than anybody else. Come on. Silly tabs. Okay, so this takes us into what did I say here? Liberato, the sexy, something like that. Anyway, so Brazil is in a full revolt because they're not happy with the way that their election was run. And they're having their own January 6th down there. There are millions of people, tens of millions of people probably, out in the streets of Brazil. They're essentially in a full revolt right now, and the establishment is doing everything it can to spin this as another January 6th about white supremacy. So here we go.
Hundreds of protesters have been detained following the storming Brazil's presidential palace, Congress, and Supreme Court on Sunday in the capital, Brasilia. Supporters of former President Jair Bolsonaro still don't.
So I'm just going to pause here for 1 second because a couple of people are thrown in on the chats. Has James Hopp had his hearing yet? No, he hasn't had his hearing yet. He's preparing for that now. And Dale is saying, poor James Hopp, seems like he just vanished. All his efforts for nothing. No, that's not true, guys. I got an update from James there recently. I reached out to him to see if he wanted to come on the podcast and give us an update. And he replied that he's focusing on his courts martial right now. And you know, just kind of getting in the right headspace and stuff like that. He's been through a lot, as we can all understand. So there's a little bit of mission wear there to address before he goes into the next battle. But he sounds positive, and you know, he didn't just go away. It's just that he has to focus on that legal battle space right now, and I do as well. You know, I have some charter challenges I got to write for some court appearances I need to make here in my hometown of Sydney, Nova Scotia, for some charges I have still hanging over my head for not wearing my mask while I was shopping for groceries, trying to eat. And anyway, even though the Nova Scotia Court of Appeals has already ruled that those mandates were illegal and violative of Nova Scotia Human Rights Code, Canadian Human Rights Code, and International Rights Code, looks like I'm still going to need to address that. So I need to take some time and work on my own challenges. And if I need to take some time off to do that, I hope I don't. But if I do, don't take it personally. We're all fighting a war on all fronts here. So that's all that James is doing right now. And he seems to me to be doing quite well. And he's doing all the right things that he needs to do right now. So.
Recognize Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva's victory more than a week after he was sworn in. President Lula's administration has vowed to punish the protesters.
We had the crime of coup d'etat, that's the name in the penal code, so that there is no doubt about it. We had the crime of attempted violent abolition of the democratic rule of law. We had the crime of damage.
After Bolsonaro supporters stormed the government buildings, the army and police removed them from their camp in front of a military base in the capital, Brasilia. An investigation is now underway to track down the ringleaders of the riot. According to Lula's administration, those responsible for the damage will have to pay for the repairs.
To avoid other attacks to Brazilian democratic institutions after the arrests in Brasilia, camps where many protesters stayed for more than 70 days in the surroundings of military headquarters were dismantled. This happened in a lot of cities, like São Paulo, where security forces asked the protesters to leave and tents were removed during the day.
We talked to a lot of officers from the military police and from the army. There are still some people talking to them, trying to negotiate, but I believe that we achieved our goal, which was to show the world that the majority elected Bolsonaro and that we don't accept other results.
Police officers confirmed to TRT World there was negotiation and that the protesters didn't resist the removal. Although they questioned the results, there is no evidence of any irregularity in Lula's victory.
Shame on the armed forces. They don't do anything. I am not crazy. I'm normal. But I want some action from the army and the police. They have to save us.
The president tweeted a statement signed by the presidents of the Senate, the Deputies Chamber, and the Supreme Court, rejecting what they are calling the terrorist attacks on Brazilian institutions. Lula also condemned the lack of security that resulted in the attack. Meanwhile, the international community is voicing their support for Lula's democratically elected administration and condemning the attacks. U.S. President Joe Biden has spoken to Lula.
So I just want to point out that, you know, all of this is very much couched in the vernacular of the establishment. So there's I just got to back this up because they're showing a tweet from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as they're saying this. And yeah, AOC, I think Gad Saad, Professor Gad Saad calls her Alexandria Occasional Cortex. She's a hard lefty down in the U.S. And this is what they're using to support this idea that the current administration is the legitimate one, and the international community says, Brazil, you better do what you're told. So here, one more time.
Meanwhile, the international community is voicing their support for Lula's democratic.
So that's Alexandria Occasional Cortex. Nearly 2 years after the day the U.S. Capitol was attacked by fascists, we see fascist movements abroad attempt to do the same in Brazil. We must stand in solidarity with Lula's officials, democratically elected government. So Lula's democratically elected government. The U.S. must cease granting refugee to Bolsonaro in Florida. And is that how you spell refugee? Yeah, this is the thing. It's so transparent, I guess, to me, because I've been watching them do this since the early 2010s, and Brazil is it has strategic importance. Okay, it's a foothold, I think, for China in the Western Hemisphere. They're signing on to that whole BRICS thing, and that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and oh shoot, I forget who's A. Sorry, S. Yeah, S is I forget. So anyway, they have this international agreement. If they get a currency, like the United States is in some serious trouble, and so is the Enlightenment, if that's the case, because the authoritarians are taking over, and this is kind of part of the global strategy. As far as I can see it, they're trying to pull Brazil into the Chinese orbit, and we have another election that is that has a population in an uproar, because, well, that's China's candidate, presumably, right?
Democratically elected administration and condemning the attacks. U.S. President Joe Biden has spoken to Lula and invited him to Washington in February, while he's under pressure to deport Bolsonaro, who was hospitalized on Monday in Florida due to abdominal pain. Luciana Tadeu, São Paulo, TRT World.
Okay, so a bit propagandistic there, but some good video, some good points that can be verified. But you can see they're trying to spin this as a global fascist movement. And it is absurd, because that is one of the big lies in the propaganda narrative out there and in academia, is that fascism is somehow right-wing. It's not. It's a form of socialism. Mussolini was a Marxist. He edited a Marxist newspaper while he was in college and or university, and he went further to the left when he went to Spain on the side of the fascists, and when he came back to Italy, that's when he went further left. He went more authoritarian, and it was Giovanni Gentile who was the founding philosopher of fascism. And he said everything inside the state, nothing outside the state. And that's actually more akin, I think, to what we see in China right now. The way that Chinese communism seems to be functioning is it's like they will let people run their billion-dollar companies, but when the CCP comes knocking and says, you need to do something for us, they have to do it, right? They'll just get disappeared. And we've seen very powerful billionaires. One guy rose to prominence. I don't remember what his name was, just a few years ago, rose to prominence internationally and didn't even really insult Xi Jinping, but wasn't sufficiently flattering toward him. So he's gone. And that's probably more akin to something like Giovanni Gentile would have envisioned, I think, more so than perhaps even Marx. Or Lenin, for that matter, because the Chinese Communist Party is Leninist for all intents and purposes. So here again, it says the insurrection was reminiscent of the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. So it wasn't an attack. They opened the doors and they let people in and then and arrested them for trespassing and held them for over a year. But it wasn't an attack. There was nothing violent about it. The only shots fired were by somebody in the chambers as Ashley Babbitt, a 14-year veteran of the U.S. Air Force, climbed through an already broken window. She got shot in the neck. We don't even know who did that or why. But anyway, so here they are. This is the propaganda line here. It says the insurrection was reminiscent of the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. And what's really happening is the people can see that their election's been rigged, and they're not putting up with it, right? But they'll smear them as fascists, even though they're probably much further to the right than actual fascists are.
Totaliza 69 dias de manifestação.
Por favor, para de ser aqueles bonequinhos que fica assim, ó, faz isso, faz aquilo. Faz o certo. Faz o bem. Para de ser mariquita assim, ó. Por favor.
So here's Bolsonaro, and he's saying peaceful, lawful demonstrations are part of a democracy. However, pillaging and invasions of public buildings as occurred today, such as those practiced by the left in 2013 and 2017, are outside the law. Okay, yeah, and that seems appropriate. And I think Bolsonaro's in Florida right now. He's a refugee in Florida. And he was, I think, described as Trumpist while he was in there. So that pretty much tells you all you need to know about what happened here in Brazil.
We do not carry any spirit of revenge against those who tried to subjugate the nation to their personal.
E essas pessoas, esses vândalos, que a gente poderia chamar de nazistas.
Okay, so it's all the same rhetoric. These vandals, which we could call fanatic Nazis, fanatic fascists. And I think they use the Nazis and the fascists because that was the West's struggle with authoritarianism, with leftism, collectivism. It just doesn't work. And that's that's why they keep throwing these at us, because it's kind of near and dear to our hearts, right? Like when I went to elementary school, the lesson that we took from the rise of fascism and Nazism in Europe was that it can happen here too. Like you need to be on guard for this, stand on guard for thee. And yeah, there's something about us that keeps pushing us towards this total annihilation. And so anyway, there's something about us, but now it's been flipped, and the new history seems to be that the West invented, authoritarianism, hatred. They invented the fanaticism, but this is the kind of thing that we see all over the world, and most places have already fallen to it. We're the only place left that's still resisting this. So anyway.
De fascistas fanáticos, sabe, fizeram o que nunca foi feito na história desse país. Nós chamamos essas pessoas de tudo que é abominável na política: invadir a sede do governo, invadir a sede do Congresso Nacional, invadir a Suprema Corte. Como verdadeiros vândalos, destruindo o que encontrava pela frente.
Invadiram o prédio do STF. Nós vamos entrar. Invadiram o prédio do STF. Nós vamos entrar. Isso está acontecendo. Aqui no Supremo Tribunal Federal, eles acabam de escrever.
Okay, it says Bolsonaro left for Orlando on December 30th. He did not attend Lula's inauguration.
Esse ex-presidente,
He's saying that former president is an idiot, a coward who left for the United States 2 days before the government change.
Idiota, covarde, tanto que ele saiu 2 dias antes de passar faixa, foi para os Estados Unidos.
O que aconteceu com a senhora?
Isso é injustiça, não tem bandido aqui.
Says this is an injustice. There are no criminals here. We were just protesting. We want to save the country.
Nós só manifestamos, queremos salvar o país.
1,200 arrested. Okay, and that was insider news. And I'm just going to point out that they have the little check mark here on their channel. This is YouTube. So if they're verified by YouTube, then I usually take that as a sign that they're probably propagandistic, with very few exceptions. Okay, and Peterson, of course, has been making all kinds of international headlines just for standing up to the thuggery that he's getting from his professional association. But here's Rupa Subramanian, and she says Jordan Peterson is being punished for daring to contradict leftist orthodoxy. I think that's pretty right on the head. And we like Supra around here. Subramanian here. Well, Rupa, I'll say Rupa. That's easier. But yeah, V4F, we're pretty fond of Rupa. I see her articles getting posted in the chats quite a bit and stuff like that. So she's one of the good ones at the National Compost. So let's keep an eye on her. So she says, Jordan Peterson is being punished for daring to contradict leftist orthodoxy. What we have is a regulatory body wanting to re-educate a member who disagrees with a set of correct opinions. The right to freedom of expression, which is already tenuous in Canada, where it doesn't enjoy the robust constitutional protection that it does in the United States, is increasingly coming under threat from professional bodies attempting to impose progressive ideological, quote, consensus, close quote, on their members. I like the wording that she's using here, and she's pointing out the contrast between here and the United States. I think this is pretty bold for a publication such as this. So good on Rupa. Okay, already the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario has cautioned its members not to speak out against any public health mandates or recommendations, including lockdowns. The Law Society of Ontario narrowly failed to compel its members to sign up a mandatory diversity pledge to sign up to a mandatory diversity pledge, a decision only overturned after a popular revolt from its members. The latest target of this ideologically driven cancel culture in Canada's professional bodies is no less than the noted Canadian icon Jordan Peterson, a distinguished clinical psychologist, former professor at the University of Toronto, and more recently a global celebrity commentator who reaches millions through his podcast and public writing. The College of Psychologists of Ontario apparently doesn't like the fact that Peterson has criticized Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and retweeted Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre based on complaints from individuals who identify thus far being kept confidential. Sorry, I'm kind of laughing at my own Freudian slip there because I do call him the cuttlefish crime minister, and I actually started to read crime minister instead of prime minister. So I think maybe from now on, I'm just going to roll with that. The college wants Peterson to undertake mandatory remedial training course on social media, presumably to change his political views, or at the very least to prevent him from sharing them publicly. The government body has made the completely absurd claim that somehow Peterson sharing his ideological and political convictions is damaging to the profession as a whole. Of course, had he tweeted in favor of the Trudeau government and its allies, you can bet your bottom dollar that he would never have faced such censure. Yeah, that's very true. I reached out to Peterson, who explained that he intends to make publicly available the relevant documentation covering the multiple allegations leveled against him by the college. His challenge to the college will be to prove that its allegations stand up under scrutiny when everything is publicly available and not shrouded in secrecy. If it can't make its case, it would like all of the individuals associated with the allegations against him to resign, and the college to reconstitute its rules of governance to ensure nothing like this happens ever again. Well done, Jordan Peterson. And that was kind of why I wanted to throw this in here, because I know I was talking to some folks in the freedom movement, and I guess the persecution of Professor Peterson is getting people down. And I think he has the right idea, though. Like, he is very well established. He doesn't need these people at all. He hasn't been practicing as a clinician for quite some time. So this is no lost income for him. He's probably richer than he's ever been. He's with Daily Wire right now. And you know what? Like, they, I think, are picking a fight that they just can't win, and he's going to humiliate them. He's going to show the world how ridiculous these theocrats really are, and that's what he's doing here. He wants this, okay? So I don't think that this is any reason for us in the freedom movement to be worried or depressed. I think they're picking a fight that they can't win, and they're going to get taken to school here, okay, and very publicly. So this is good for us, and Peterson knows it. This is a fight that he wants. So Peterson, one of the few individuals in Canada who has the clout as well as the intellectual and moral courage to fight the good fight and not roll over when attacked by a major institution on purely ideological grounds. What we have here is a professional regulatory body that wants to, quote, re-educate, close quote, someone within the ranks for failing to comply with the establishment's ideological set of, quote, correct, close quote, opinions, which in Canada are on the far left of the political spectrum. It's downright Orwellian. Absolutely. The reality, however, is that there is no ideological consensus. The action against Peterson and similar actions by other professional bodies are clearly intended to have a chilling effect, preventing those who don't share the establishment's views from airing their dissenting opinions, even in Canada's universities, where professors, in theory, have a protected right of academic freedom, and many choose to self-censor for fear of running afoul of administrators, funding agencies, and others who will attempt to cancel them in one way or another. Yeah, and there is a cumulative effect. I like the way that she's framing this, because it's across our society. It's in all of our institutions, and it's the state that is seemingly run entirely out of PMO at this point, and PCO. And Justin Trudeau's just taking orders from them. So, but yeah, when we saw this happen, I want to say with the Mark Norman affair, and basically when you really kind of drill it down into the weeds, the whole thing came up against Marie Heinen, the Elvis-haired goddess of Canadian law, whom was hired by Norman as his lawyer. And in court, the prosecution service of Ontario was trying to claim attorney-client privilege over emails giving them directions on their prosecution strategy from the PMO. And Marie Heinen was like, well, the PMO is not your client. The Crown of Ontario is. So that's where it all fell apart right there. And I think what it really came down to was throughout our institutions at the highest levels, we have a bunch of throne-sniffing sycophants that are driven by their impulse to seek approval from their higher-ups. And that's what the report into the Somalia affair said about the boomer generation of officers. That's what I'm seeing happen across the board right now, is that the people that are running our institutions are quite authoritarian in their cultural bent. So back to the article. The idea of re-educating professionals simply for holding views that differ from the current ruling ideology sounds bizarre in a place like Canada, but has always been the standard operating procedure in authoritarian countries, whether the far left or the far right. Just think of Soviet dissidents in like the scientist Andrei Zarkov and the novelist Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who were censured, discredited professionally, unable to work, and even forced into imprisonment or exile. And that has a lot to do with why Russia is collapsing right now. In order to fully appreciate it, I would recommend Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. She was a Soviet defector who wrote the great American novel back in like the early 80s, was it? And anyway, it's kind of the American Orwell, I guess, and it's very verbose. It's quite long, but it's very, very well done. And essentially, what happens is there's a brain drain. Like you drive all of the productive people away. The fact of the matter is, if there's one thing that would really help Africa, it would be a lot more geniuses among them, and we brain drain them by bringing Rwandan nurses here, apparently, to replace dissidents who wouldn't take the jab in Nova Scotia. So that's something else that's going on. They're replacing all the dissidents in medicine as well, and bringing in essentially foreign scabs to replace them. And Pierre Poilievre endorses that practice, apparently. So that's the state of it right now. The state is going for essentially total ideological homogeneity. So that's a very dangerous territory in my view. The brilliant scientist who invented the hydrogen bomb ahead of the Americans, Zakharov's punishment for daring to question the Soviet Union's socialist expansionist ideology was to be stripped of all his honors and titles and sent into exile to live under house arrest in Gorky, a city that Westerners were not allowed to visit. The great novelist Solzhenitsyn was hounded and eventually expelled from the Soviet Union and stripped of his citizenship simply for disagreeing with the official communist ideology that governed the country. Those who wish to silence free speech in liberal democracies such as Canada don't have the total power of the Soviet state, but nor do they need it. All you have to do is silence people and discredit them professionally, thereby preventing them from working and earning a living and likely causing grievous psychological harm. Peterson's enormous stature and reach gives him the ability to refuse to face censure from the college and talk publicly about what it's attempting to do to him. In such a climate of fear, how many rank and file professionals, such as doctors, lawyers, professionals, and teachers, will be able to speak honestly to their clients, students, and public square? Now that they've been put on notice that it's simply unacceptable to question the official political orthodoxy. What's being attempted here is nothing less than what the noted scholar Noam Chomsky calls, quote, manufacturing consent, close quote. The end point will be the chilling prospect of a closing of the Canadian mind. Great article by Rupa there. I just want to give a full throat endorsement of the way like she laid this all out and everything. And it's a purge that took place in the military. It's also in the medical field. It's also in academia. It's the kind of ideological purge that took place under Stalin. So history seems to be repeating itself in a very negative way. But I maintain that going after Jordan Peterson is going to prove to be detrimental to the communist movement in Canada. Because I think they're, like I said, I mean, they're not going to be able to take this guy on. Okay, and I'm back to the start. So that's it for today there, guys. Thanks for staying with me. A little over my time as usual, but there's so much going on, and I think it's now is not the time for silence. So it's all about getting that content out there right now. So thanks again for staying with me, guys. I'll throw to a couple of comments before I sign off, and here's one on Peterson. So Chev is saying, they know Dr. Peterson is well established and has enormous social reach and influence. I stand firmly with Dr. Peterson, and you encourage others to do the same. Yeah. And I saw somebody commenting on something about doing the right thing there earlier, and I put it up, but I didn't say anything about it. And I used to say to my kids all the time, they're grown and gone now, but what I used to say to them all the time was doing the right thing is never easy. That's what you should expect. So, yeah, I take it we're talking about some of our institutional leaders right now. And Chev is saying ego and power hungry. And let's see, Dale, we're falling trees against the wind. Yeah. I think that's what happens when you try to engage in social engineering. People don't like being coerced. Humans have a very strong sense of fairness that's very prominent in primate species. Like if you put a monkey in a cage and give him a cucumber for a treat, when he does a task, he'll be really happy with that until you put another monkey in a cage next to him and give that monkey a grape for a task or a banana, you know, whatever. And if you do that, then that first monkey, he won't accept the cucumber anymore. He'll throw it away. So you can't expect, you know, to have one set of laws for me and one for thee. It's not a sustainable model. All systems require feedback in order to be stable, at least in electronics. And I'm pretty sure that principle carries forward through all systems. So that's why we need functioning democracy, which requires open debate and discussion in order to maintain stability. It's otherwise it's just a perpetual state of revolution, and really democracy is sort of the nonviolent means of achieving revolution in the modern era, because if what ends up happening again and again and again is those who are born first have a tendency to, you know, accrue wealth and power as they get older, and then use their power gained through the process of aging to dominate generations coming up behind them and consolidate the resources and power in a single generation, which appears to be basically what happened with Stalinism, and we seem to be observing happening now in the full light of a modern history and the Harvard Statistical Database. So it's very interesting times to be living through, and as they say, maybe we live in interesting times. So with that, folks, I'll give you the sign off. Let me get my brand up here. Stay frosty and stay safe out there.